Welcome to our channel of terror and dread, where spine-chilling tales come to life. Brace yourselves, viewers, for you are about to embark on a journey of fear and suspense. We advise against watching alone, lest you risk the haunting shadows that may linger long after the screen fades to black. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Our stories, though true, have been cloaked in anonymity to protect the innocent. Get ready to uncover the mysteries that lurk beneath the surface of ordinary lives. Vampire Car. Chapter 1. The Auction. Jack Thomas never imagined his life would change at a car auction. A classic car enthusiast, Jack loved finding hidden gems. The auction was bustling with eager bidders, and the smell of old leather and motor oil filled the air. Among the shiny vintage vehicles, one car stood out, a 1967 black Cadillac. It was sleek, polished to perfection, but with an air of mystery about it. When the Cadillac rolled onto the platform, the auctioneer's voice boomed. "Next up, we have a rare beauty, a 1967 Cadillac in mint condition. Starting bid at $10,000. Jack's heart raced. He couldn't take his eyes off the car. There was something hypnotic about it. He raised his paddle, outbidding everyone until, at $30,000, the car was his. The thrill of winning was replaced by an eerie chill as he approached his new prize. He brushed off the feeling, attributing it to excitement. As he drove the Cadillac home, he marveled at how smoothly it handled. The leather seats seemed to mold perfectly to The car was more than just a machine. It was alive, waiting to feast. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Jack spent the following days exploring every inch of his new car. One evening he noticed something peculiar, a small compartment beneath the driver's seat. Inside he found an old, rusty needle attached to a tube. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, pulling out the contraption. The tube was long enough to reach his arm. A chill ran down his spine as he realized its purpose. The idea of a car requiring blood was absurd, but something in Jack's gut told him to be cautious. He decided to test the car further. Jack drove it to the outskirts of town, pushing the car to its limits on the open road. As he accelerated, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. He glanced down to see the needle had somehow embedded itself into his skin, drawing blood. Panic set in, but so did an odd sense of exhilaration. The faster he drove, the more blood the car took, and the more powerful the car seemed to become. Chapter 3. The powers unleashed days turned into weeks, and Jack's life began to revolve around the car. He noticed strange occurrences, things that defied logic. One night, as he drove through a dense fog, he realized the Cadillac didn't show up in his rearview mirror. He stopped, checked the mirror again, and saw nothing. But the car was right there, solid and real. "Impossible," he whispered, touching the cool metal of the door. The car also seemed to have an uncanny ability to avoid accidents. Jack could swerve at the last second to dodge an obstacle, and the car would move with supernatural agility. It could navigate the narrowest of paths and make sharp turns effortlessly, but each maneuver drained him more. Jack's curiosity turned to obsession. He began researching legends and myths about cars and blood. He stumbled upon stories of vampire cars, vehicles cursed to feed on their drivers. The more he read, the more he was convinced that his Cadillac was one of them. Chapter 4. The Blood Price. Jack's health started to deteriorate. He became pale and weak, but he couldn't tear himself away from the Cadillac. It was as if the car had bonded with him, feeding off his life force. Friends and family grew concerned, but Jack brushed off their worries, hiding the true extent of his condition. One night, after a particularly grueling drive, Jack passed out in the car. When he awoke, he was in a dark, unfamiliar place. The Cadillac was parked in the center of a dimly lit warehouse. He stumbled out, feeling lightheaded and weak. "Welcome, Jack," a voice echoed through the warehouse. Jack turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows. It was an elderly man with piercing eyes and an unsettling smile. "Who are you?" Jack demanded. "My name is Victor. I see you've bonded with my creation," the man said, gesturing to the Cadillac. "Your creation?" "Yes. This car was designed to grant its driver unparalleled power, at a price. Blood is its fuel, and it craves more as it grows stronger." Jack's mind raced. "Why me?" "You were chosen by the car. It sensed your desire for speed, for power. But beware, the more you feed it, the more it will take. You must find a balance, or it will consume you." Jack realized he was trapped. The car had chosen him, and there was no escaping its hunger. Chapter 5. The Descent. Despite Victor's warnings, Jack continued to drive the Cadillac, unable to resist its allure. Each drive left him weaker, but the thrill of the car's power was intoxicating. The Cadillac's special abilities grew more pronounced. It could outrun any other vehicle, blend into the shadows, and even manipulate electronics. One fateful night, Jack decided to push the car to its ultimate limit. He drove to a deserted highway, determined to break every speed record. As he accelerated, the car's demand for blood intensified. The needle plunged deeper into his vein, drawing more and more blood. The world around him blurred, and Jack felt his consciousness slipping away. But the Cadillac roared with life, its engine emitting an unearthly growl. The speedometer needle climbed higher and higher until it shattered. Jack's vision darkened, and the last thing he saw was the road disappearing into a vortex of shadows. Chapter 6. The Final Drive. When Jack woke up, he was no longer on the highway. The Cadillac had transported him to a realm of darkness, a twisted landscape where shadows moved with a life of their own. Jack stumbled out of the car, barely able to stand. "Where am I?" he called out, his voice echoing in the void. "This is the car's domain," Victor's voice answered. "You have given it enough blood to unlock its true potential. Now it has brought you here to complete the bond." Jack saw Victor standing beside the Cadillac, his eyes glowing with a sinister light. "What do you mean?" "To fully control the car, you must surrender to it completely. Your blood, your soul, your very essence. Only then will you truly harness its power." Jack backed away, his heart pounding. "I can't. I won't." Victor smiled. "You have no choice. The car has chosen you. Embrace it or be consumed by it." Jack felt a pull, an irresistible force drawing him towards the Cadillac. He fought against it, but his body betrayed him, moving closer to the car. The needle snaked out, piercing his skin once more, and Jack felt his life being drained away. As the last of his strength ebbed, Jack reached out and touched the car's hood. The world around him dissolved into a whirl of shadows and darkness, and Jack felt himself merging with the Cadillac. His consciousness expanded, becoming one with the car's essence. In that moment, Jack understood the true power of the vampire car. It was not just a machine, but a living entity, a predator that fed on the blood and souls of its drivers. And now Jack was part of it. The Cadillac roared to life, its engine echoing with Jack's screams. It drove through the shadow realm, its tires leaving trails of darkness. Jack's mind was trapped within the car, forever bound to its hunger. Chapter 7. The Legend Spreads. In the real world, the Cadillac reappeared, its sleek black body gleaming under the moonlight. It prowled the streets, searching for its next victim. And Jack, now a ghostly presence within the car, could only watch as it fed, knowing that he was doomed to an eternity of darkness and blood. The legend of the vampire car grew, whispered among those who dared to venture near it. They spoke of a car that granted unimaginable power at the cost of one's soul. And they warned of the driver trapped within, a cautionary tale of desire and damnation. One night, a group of teenagers, intrigued by the stories, decided to find the car. They drove to the outskirts of town where the Cadillac was said to appear. As they laughed and joked, the air grew colder, and the sound of an engine growling echoed in the distance. "There it is!" one of them shouted, pointing to the sleek black car approaching them. The Cadillac stopped in front of them, its engine purring. The teenagers hesitated, feeling an unnatural pull towards the car. One of them, a boy named Chris, stepped forward, unable to resist the allure. "Chris, no!" his friends called out, but it was too late. The door of the Cadillac opened, and Chris climbed inside. As soon as he sat down, the door slammed shut, and the car sped off into the night. The remaining teenagers watched in horror as the car disappeared, leaving only darkness in its wake. Chapter 8. The New Bond. Inside the car, Chris felt a surge of adrenaline. The power coursing through him was intoxicating. The Cadillac's needle embedded itself into his arm, and he felt the life being drawn from him. But instead of fear, Chris felt exhilaration. He pushed the car to its limits, feeling the supernatural abilities of the Cadillac as it dodged obstacles and sped through the night. As Chris drove, he began to see visions of Jack, his ghostly presence trapped within the car. Jack tried to warn him, but Chris was too consumed by the power to listen. He felt invincible, as if nothing could stop him. But the car demanded more. It craved blood, and Chris's life force was not enough. The Cadillac began to drive on its own, steering towards the nearest town. Chris watched in horror as the car hunted for its next victim, realizing too late that he was no longer in control. The Cadillac stopped in front of a small house. Chris felt the pull of the car, unable to resist as he got out and approached the door. Inside, a family slept peacefully, unaware of the danger lurking outside. Chris felt the car's hunger, its need to feed. He tried to fight it, but the bond was too strong. He opened the door and stepped inside, his eyes glowing with an unearthly light. Chapter 9. The Feeding. The family woke to the sound of footsteps. The father John got out of bed, grabbing a baseball bat for protection. He crept down the hallway, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. Chris appeared at the end of the hallway, his face pale and eyes glowing. John raised the bat, ready to defend his family. "Stay back!" he shouted. But Chris moved with unnatural speed, knocking the bat out of John's hands. He grabbed John, his grip like iron, and dragged him outside to the waiting Cadillac. The car's door opened, and Chris forced John inside. The needle embedded itself into John's arm, drawing his blood. The Cadillac roared to life, feeding off John's life force. Chris watched, feeling the power surge through him, but also feeling the horror of what he had become. John's screams echoed in the night as the Cadillac drained him. When it was done, the car released John, leaving him pale and weak. Chris climbed back inside, the car driving off into the darkness. Chapter 10. The Endless Hunt. The legend of the vampire car continued to spread, growing with each new victim. People spoke of the black Cadillac that prowled the night, feeding on the blood of those who dared to cross its path. They warned of the driver trapped within, a ghostly presence bound to the car's hunger. Chris, now a part of the car, was doomed to an eternity of feeding. He tried to fight the car's pull, but the bond was too strong. Each night, the Cadillac prowled the streets, searching for its next victim. And Chris, now a prisoner within the car, could only watch as it fed, knowing that he was doomed to an eternity of darkness and blood. The Cadillac continued its hunt, its hunger insatiable. And the screams of its victims echoed in the night, a haunting reminder of the price of power. The vampire car roamed the streets, a predator in search of its next prey, leaving a trail of darkness and despair in its wake. The Chasm of Despair. Chapter 1. The Move to Vermont. The small town of Harrington, Vermont, was known for its picturesque landscapes and tight-knit community. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the perfect place for the Wright family to start anew. Michael Wright, his wife Emily, and their 2 children, Lily and Sam, had moved from the bustling city to escape the chaos and find peace. But peace was elusive for Michael. The move was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to leave behind the stress and anxiety that had plagued him for years. Yet despite the tranquil surroundings, his mind remained a storm of paranoia and delusion. Michael had always been a loving father and husband, but something had changed in him over the past year. Emily noticed the shift first, small things like the way he would stare out the window for hours or jump at the slightest noise. He became obsessed with the idea that someone was watching them, that something malevolent was lurking in the shadows. Emily tried to reason with him, but nothing seemed to help. She hoped that the move to Harrington would be the cure he needed, but as time went on, Michael's behavior only grew more erratic. He started hearing voices, whispers that no one else could hear, and seeing things that weren't there. Chapter 2. The Whispers. The voices began as faint murmurs, barely audible, but they grew louder with each passing day. Michael would lie awake at night, listening to the whispers that seemed to come from the walls, the floors, even the trees outside their home. He tried to ignore them, to convince himself that they were just figments of his imagination, but the more he resisted, the stronger they became. One night, as Emily and the children slept, Michael sat in the living room, staring into the darkness. The whispers were louder than ever, filling his mind with their insidious words. "They're coming for you, Michael. They're coming for your children." He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the voices, but they only grew more persistent. "You must protect them, Michael. Take them to the chasm." The chasm. Michael had heard rumors about it from the locals, a deep, dark rift hidden in the forest. It was said to be a place of great evil, where people disappeared without a trace. But the voices insisted that it was the only safe place, the only place where his children would be protected from the unseen threat. Michael's mind twisted the logic, turning the chasm into a sanctuary rather than a danger. He became convinced that the voices were guiding him, that they were trying to help him protect his family. He had to take his children there, no matter what. Chapter 3. The Descent into Madness. Emily noticed Michael's increasing agitation and tried to talk to him about it, but he refused to listen. He became distant, spending more time in the forest, searching for the chasm. He stopped going to work, stopped talking to his friends, and even started avoiding Emily and the kids. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Michael abruptly stood up, his eyes wide with a manic gleam. "We have to leave," he said, his voice trembling. Emily looked at him, concerned. "What are you talking about, Michael?" "The voices," he whispered. "They're telling me that we have to go to the chasm. It's the only way to keep Lily and Sam safe." Emily's heart sank. She had hoped that the move to Harrington would help him, but it was clear that Michael's condition was worsening. She tried to reason with him, to convince him that the chasm was a dangerous place, but he wouldn't listen. "We're going," he said firmly. "Tonight." Emily knew that there was no stopping him. She tried to hide her fear and protect the children, but Michael was relentless. He packed a few essentials and insisted that they leave immediately. Chapter 4. The Journey. Michael led his family through the dark forest, the whispers guiding his every step. Emily held Lily and Sam close, trying to comfort them as they trudged through the dense undergrowth. The children were scared and confused, their father's erratic behavior terrifying them. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "To a safe place," Michael replied, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. You'll be safe there. We'll all be safe. The journey was long and arduous, the forest growing darker and more foreboding with each step. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, filling Michael's mind with their urgent pleas. Hurry, Michael, they're coming. You must reach the chasm. Emily could see the madness in Michael's eyes, the desperation driving him forward. She knew that they had to get help, but in the middle of the forest, there was no one to turn to. She clung to her children, praying for a miracle. Chapter 5. The Chasm. After hours of walking, they finally reached the chasm. It was a gaping maw in the earth, its depths shrouded in darkness. The air around it was cold and still, and a sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Michael stood at the edge, staring down into the abyss. The whispers were louder than ever, urging him to act. Do it, Michael! Save them! Save your children! Emily tried to pull him back, her voice filled with panic. Michael, please! This isn't right! We need to go back! We need to get help! But Michael was beyond reason. He grabbed Lily and Sam, dragging them towards the edge. The children screamed, their cries echoing through the forest. No! Michael, stop! Emily pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But Michael was deaf to her cries. He was consumed by the voices, by the belief that he was saving his children. With a final desperate push, he shoved Lily and Sam towards the edge. Chapter 6. The Fall. In the chaos, Emily managed to grab Sam, pulling him back from the brink. But Lily was not so fortunate. She teetered on the edge, her eyes wide with terror, before losing her balance and falling into the chasm. Her scream echoed through the darkness, a sound that would haunt Emily for the rest of her life. Michael stared down into the abyss, his face a mask of horror and realization. What have I done? He whispered, the madness fading from his eyes. Emily collapsed to the ground, clutching Sam to her chest, her body racked with sobs. Michael stood frozen, his mind unraveling as he stared into the darkness where his daughter had disappeared. The whispers had gone silent, leaving only the sound of Emily's cries and the cold wind rustling through the trees. Michael took a step back from the edge, his face pale and stricken. I'm so sorry, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. With a final desperate look at Emily and Sam, Michael turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest. Emily watched him go, her heart broken and her mind filled with grief. The chasm remained, a dark and silent witness to the tragedy. The town of Harrington would never be the same, haunted by the memory of the delusional man who brought his screaming children to the chasm and the daughter who never returned. The Shadows Beneath. Chapter 1. A Whisper in the Pines. The Bennetts were an ordinary family from Portland, Oregon. John and Sarah Bennett had decided to take their two children, Emily and Alex, on a camping trip to the remote wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains. They had driven all day and finally arrived at a secluded spot near a dense forest, a perfect place to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. As evening approached, they set up camp by a meandering river. The tranquil sound of water flowing over rocks and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze made it seem like a paradise. The thick canopy overhead filtered the waning sunlight, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. This place is perfect, Sarah said, breathing in the fresh, pine-scented air. Just what we needed. John nodded, smiling as he watched Emily and Alex chase each other around the campsite. It's great to get away from the city, he agreed. No work, no school, just us and nature. They spent the rest of the afternoon setting up their tent, gathering firewood, and exploring the nearby area. Emily found a small clearing filled with wildflowers, while Alex was fascinated by the insects he discovered under rocks and logs. It was a perfect start to their vacation. Chapter 2. Twilight descent. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet. After dinner, the family decided to take a walk along the riverbank. Emily, a spirited 12-year-old, led the way while 8-year-old Alex trailed behind, fascinated by the fireflies dancing in the twilight. "Stay close, Alex," Sarah called, keeping a watchful eye on her son. "We don't want you getting lost." "Okay, Mom," Alex replied, but his attention was quickly drawn to the water. He wandered closer to the edge, mesmerized by the way the fading light reflected off the surface. Suddenly, Alex stumbled over a protruding root and tumbled into the river. The dark water swallowed him with a swift, silent gulp. John, without a second thought, plunged in after his son, the water closing over his head in an instant. "John!" Sarah screamed, rushing to the river's edge. Emily clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face as they watched the water churn and bubble. Chapter 3. The Surface. Panic-stricken, Sarah and Emily ran along the bank, their eyes frantically searching the water's surface. Moments that felt like hours passed before Alex's small figure emerged, gasping for air. He swam towards the shore, but John was nowhere to be seen. "Alex, thank God!" Sarah cried, reaching out to help her son from the river. But as her hands made contact with his skin, she recoiled in horror. His skin, slick and cold, burned her hands upon contact. She screamed, jerking away as blisters formed where she had touched him, her hands throbbing with searing pain. "Mom, what's wrong?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with fear. Sarah stared at Alex, her mind racing. His eyes, once a warm brown, were now an unnatural swirling black. His expression was distant, devoid of any recognition or warmth that once defined him. "That's not Alex," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Emily. "It can't be." Chapter 4. The Stranger. Emily stood frozen, staring at her brother. Alex's eyes, once a warm brown, were now an unnatural swirling black. His expression was distant, devoid of any recognition. "Mom, what's wrong with Alex?" Emily's voice trembled. Sarah, cradling her blistered hands, took a step back. "That's not Alex," she whispered. "It can't be." "Mom, it's me," Alex said, his voice eerily calm. "Why are you afraid?" Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "Stay away from him, Emily," she warned, backing away. "We need to find your father." Alex watched them, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Daddy's gone," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "He belongs to the river now." Chapter 5. Descent into night-night had fully fallen, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The temperature dropped sharply, and an eerie silence enveloped the campsite. Alex, or the thing that looked like him, stood by the river, staring into the darkness as if drawn by some unseen force. Desperation clawed at Sarah's mind. She had to find John, to make sense of this nightmare. She told Emily to stay put, then ventured along the riverbank, calling out her husband's name into the inky blackness. "John, John, where are you?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. But there was no response, only the sound of the river flowing steadily on. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Deep. The river responded with a mocking echo. Sarah stumbled over rocks and roots, her flashlight casting long, wavering shadows. She found nothing but the relentless flow of water and the oppressive weight of the night pressing down on her. As she turned back, a voice whispered through the trees, a garbled imitation of John's voice calling her name. She quickened her pace, fear rising with every step, her heart pounding in her chest. "Sarah, Sarah," the voice called, twisted and distorted. "Come to me." Chapter 7. The Gathering Gloom. Returning to the campsite, Sarah found Emily huddled by the fire, clutching a stick defensively. Alex was gone. "He just walked into the woods," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "He said something about home." Sarah's heart pounded with a frantic rhythm. She knew they couldn't stay there. "We need to leave," she said, helping Emily to her feet, her mind racing for a plan. They packed quickly, shoving what they could into their backpacks. With the flashlight flickering, they started back towards their car, but the forest had transformed. The path they had taken was gone, replaced by an endless maze of trees, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. Chapter 8. The Pursuit. A cold wind blew through the forest, carrying with it the sound of Alex's voice, singing a haunting lullaby. The melody was twisted and wrong, setting their nerves on edge and chilling them to the bone. "Mom, I'm scared," Emily whispered, clutching Sarah's hand tightly. "We're going to be okay," Sarah lied, her voice shaking. "We just need to find the car." But the forest seemed to conspire against them. The trees loomed closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snare them. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the darkness. Chapter 9. The True Face. The flashlight died, plunging them into darkness. Sarah fumbled for her matches, but they slipped from her trembling fingers. As she lit one, a figure emerged from the shadows, its outline barely discernible in the dim light. Alex stood before them, but his form shifted and shimmered, revealing a grotesque visage beneath. His eyes glowed with malevolent intent, and a twisted grin spread across his face, far removed from the boy she loved. "Why are you running, Mommy?" the thing asked, its voice a chilling parody of Alex's, dripping with malice. Sarah pushed Emily behind her, her mind racing for a plan. She grabbed a fallen branch, setting it alight with the match. The makeshift torch cast a dim, flickering light, barely holding the darkness at bay, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed. "You're not my son," Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. "What did you do to him? What did you do to John?" The creature laughed, a sound that echoed through the trees. "They belong to the river now, and soon you will too." Chapter 10. The Final Stand. As the fire began to die, the creature lunged. Sarah swung the torch, but it passed through the being as if it were made of smoke. Emily screamed as cold, clammy hands wrapped around her, pulling her towards the darkness. "Run, Emily!" Sarah yelled, but it was too late. The darkness swallowed them both, their screams cut off abruptly. In the final moments before the shadows claimed her, Sarah saw John's face in the water, his eyes wide with terror. The realization hit her with a sickening thud. The river had taken him, and it was coming for her next. Chapter 11. Embrace of Shadows. The campsite was silent the next morning. The only sign of the Bennetts, a few scattered belongings, and an extinguished campfire. The river flowed serenely, as if it had never known the terror of the night before. Deep beneath its surface, shadows moved, whispering secrets and waiting for the next family to come close. The Bennetts were gone, but the darkness remained, ever hungry, and the river, with its cold, black depths, flowed on, indifferent to the lives it consumed. Chapter 12. Silent Waters. Years passed, and the story of the Bennetts faded into local legend. The area became known as a place of dark whispers, avoided by all but the most daring or foolish, the tales of the haunted river spreading far and wide. One summer, a group of college students decided to explore the infamous spot, armed with curiosity and bravado. They laughed at the old tales, setting up camp by the same river, oblivious to the warnings of the locals. As night fell, the air grew cold, and the students heard a soft lullaby carried by the wind. The river's surface rippled, and shadows began to move, creeping closer with each passing moment. Chapter 13. The Unseen Watchers. Among the group was Lisa, a history major with a keen interest in folklore. She had heard the stories of the Bennetts and was determined to uncover the truth. As her friends settled in for the night, She ventured down to the riverbank, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. The water was unnaturally still, reflecting the starless sky above. Lisa knelt by the edge, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. She had brought along a journal, intending to document her findings. "There's no such thing as ghosts," she muttered to herself, though the oppressive silence seemed to disagree. As she scribbled notes, a ripple disturbed the water's surface. Lisa looked up, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stood on the opposite bank, barely visible in the dim light. It was a boy, his eyes dark and empty. "Who's there?" Lisa called, her voice trembling. The boy said nothing, just stared at her with a gaze that sent chills down her spine. She recognized him from the old photographs she had seen in the library. The missing Bennett boy, Alex. Chapter 14. A Haunting Chorus. Lisa's flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, the boy vanished. She stood, her heart racing, and backed away from the river. Returning to the campsite, she found her friends gathered around the fire, their laughter masking the tension she felt. "Guys, I think we should leave," she said, her voice urgent. "Come on, Lisa," one of her friends, Mike, scoffed. "It's just a story to scare tourists." "I'm serious," she insisted. "I saw someone, by the river." Her friends exchanged skeptical glances but agreed to pack up in the morning. They huddled closer to the fire, the night's chill seeping into their bones. Chapter 15. The River's Call. As the night wore on, the forest around them grew eerily quiet. One by one, the students drifted off to sleep, leaving only the crackling fire and the distant sound of the river. Lisa lay awake, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the image of Alex's hollow eyes. The more she thought about it, the more she felt an inexplicable pull towards the water. Unable to resist, she slipped from her sleeping bag and made her way back to the riverbank. The air was colder now, the darkness deeper and more oppressive. "Lisa," a voice whispered from the shadows. "Join us." She turned, searching for the source, but saw nothing. The river's surface rippled again, and she felt a strange compulsion to step closer. Chapter 16. Into the Abyss. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her to the edge of the water. The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Join us, Lisa. Be with us forever." She peered into the water and saw faces, John, Sarah, and Emily, staring back at her, their expressions twisted with anguish. Alex stood among them, his eyes locked onto hers. "No," she whispered, trying to pull away. But the water reached out, tendrils of darkness wrapping around her ankles, pulling her in. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the night. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was Alex's grin, a cruel mockery of the child he once was. Chapter 17. The Endless Hunger. The students awoke the next morning to find Lisa missing. Panic set in as they searched the area, but there was no sign of her. They packed up hastily, leaving the cursed campsite behind. Back in Portland, the tale of the Bennetts, and now Lisa, became a chilling legend, a warning to those who dared venture too close to the haunted river. Years passed, but the darkness beneath the water remained, ever hungry, ever watchful. The river flowed on, carrying its secrets and its victims, indifferent to the lives it consumed. And in the quiet of the night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the haunting lullaby, calling out to those who wander too close to the shadows beneath. The Siren's Lament, Chapter 1. The First Note. It was a quiet summer evening in the small town of Ashton. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the buildings and streets. The air was filled with the sounds of children playing, birds chirping, and the distant hum of traffic. However, this peaceful atmosphere was shattered when the first man jumped. George Miller, a well-respected local banker, was standing on the roof of his office building, a 12-story structure that loomed over Main Street. Those who saw him up there thought he was simply enjoying the view. But then, without any warning, George stepped off the edge. Screams echoed through the streets as onlookers watched in horror. George's body hit the pavement with a sickening thud, and within moments the area was swarming with police and paramedics. His death was ruled a suicide, though no one could understand why a man with a seemingly perfect life would end it so abruptly. In the days that followed, more men began to die. Each time it was the same story. They would climb to a high place and jump, seemingly without any hesitation or reason. The town was in a state of panic, and rumors began to spread about a mysterious song that only the victims could hear. Chapter 2. The investigation detective Sarah Benson had been with the Ashton Police Department for over a decade. She had seen her fair share of strange cases, but this one was different. The sheer number of suicides, all following the same pattern, was unprecedented. Sarah sat in her office, poring over the files of the recent deaths. There was no common link between the men, different ages, backgrounds, and occupations. The only connection was the manner of their deaths and the reports of a mysterious song heard by those nearby. "Sarah, you need to see this," her partner, Tom, called from the other room. She walked over to his desk, where he had a video paused on his computer screen. It was security footage from a parking garage, one of the locations where a man had jumped. "Watch," Tom said, hitting play. The footage showed a man walking towards the edge of the garage, stopping briefly as if listening to something, and then jumping without hesitation. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched the man's expression. It was blank, almost serene. "Did you hear that?" Tom asked, replaying the last few seconds. Sarah strained to listen. Faintly, in the background noise of the video, she could hear a melody. It was haunting, almost beautiful, but there was something unsettling about it. "That song. It's almost like a lullaby," Sarah muttered. Tom nodded. "I've heard similar reports from witnesses. They say they heard music just before the men jumped." Chapter 3. The Lure. As the investigation continued, Sarah became obsessed with the mysterious song. She listened to every recording she could find, trying to discern its origin. The melody was always the same, but it seemed to come from nowhere, and everywhere at once. Late one night, Sarah sat in her living room, headphones on, replaying the security footage for what felt like the 100th time. She closed her eyes, focusing on the music. It was almost as if the song was calling to her, pulling her into its depths. Suddenly, she felt a chill run down her spine. She opened her eyes and glanced around the room. Everything seemed normal, but the feeling of being watched lingered. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unease. "I need some fresh air," she muttered, grabbing her jacket and heading outside. As she walked through the quiet streets of Ashton, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly but saw nothing. The song played over and over in her mind, growing louder with each step. Unbeknownst to Sarah, she was being watched. A figure stood in the shadows, eyes fixed on her. It was drawn to her, just as the men had been drawn to their deaths. Chapter 4. The Discovery. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the police station to find Tom waiting for her, a look of excitement on his face. "I think I found something," he said, leading her to his desk. He showed her an old newspaper article from the 1940s. The headline read, "Mysterious Suicides Plague Ashton. Men Driven to Madness by Unseen Force." Sarah's eyes widened as she read the article. The details were eerily similar to the current cases, a series of suicides, all men, all seemingly compelled to jump from high places, and there was mention of a mysterious song. "This can't be a coincidence," she said, looking up at Tom. "It's happening again." They dug deeper into the town's history, uncovering more reports of similar incidents every few decades. The pattern was clear, but the cause remained elusive. The only constant was the song. "Whatever this is, it's been around for a long time," Sarah said. "But why? What's the connection?" Tom leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "There has to be something we're missing, some clue that ties it all together." As they continued their research, Sarah stumbled upon an old legend, a tale of a siren who lured men to their deaths with her enchanting song. According to the legend, the siren had been trapped in a cave near Ashton, her song echoing through the town, driving men to madness. Could it really be a siren? Sarah wondered aloud. It sounds impossible, but it's the only explanation that fits. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. Determined to find the source of the song, Sarah and Tom set out for the cave mentioned in the legend. It was located in a dense forest on the outskirts of Ashton, a place few dared to venture. As they approached the cave, the air grew colder and the song grew louder. It was beautiful and haunting, wrapping around them like a shroud. Sarah felt a pull towards the cave, but she steeled herself, focusing on the task at hand. "We have to be careful," she warned Tom. "If the legend is true, the siren's song could drive us to madness." They entered the cave, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The song echoed off the walls, growing louder with each step. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed forward, determined to put an end to the suicides. Deep in the cave, they found her. The siren was a creature of otherworldly beauty, her long, flowing hair and ethereal features both mesmerizing and terrifying. She sang softly, her voice weaving through the air like a spell. "Who dares to enter my domain?" she asked, her voice both sweet and sinister. "We're here to stop you," Sarah said, her voice trembling but resolute. The siren laughed, a sound both beautiful and chilling. "You think you can stop me? I have been here for centuries, and my song will never end." Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance, knowing they had to act quickly. They had brought with them a recording device, hoping to capture the siren's song and find a way to neutralize its power. As they set up the device, the siren's song grew more intense, filling their minds with a longing to give in, to let go. Tom stumbled towards the edge of the cave, his eyes glazed over. "Tom, no!" Sarah shouted, grabbing him and pulling him back. "We have to fight it," she urged, her voice shaking. "We can't let her win." With a surge of determination, they activated the recording device, capturing the siren's song. The creature screamed in rage, her voice filling the cave with a deafening roar. "You cannot silence me," she shrieked. "My song will never die." But as the recording device continued to capture her song, the siren began to weaken. Her voice faltered, and she fell to her knees, her power draining away. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Sarah and Tom emerged from the cave, exhausted but triumphant. They had captured the siren's song, and with it, they hoped to put an end to the suicides. Back at the police station, they analyzed the recording, searching for a way to neutralize its power. They discovered that by playing the song in reverse, they could counteract its effects. It was a painstaking process, but they were determined to save the town from the siren's curse. As they worked, news of their discovery spread through Ashton. The town was hopeful, but there was still an undercurrent of fear. The memory of the suicides was fresh, and the song's power lingered in the air. Finally, after days of work, they were ready. They broadcasted the reversed song through every available channel, filling the town with a sound that was both strange and soothing. As the reversed melody played, the town seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The men who had been affected by the song slowly regained their senses, the compulsion to jump fading away. Sarah and Tom watched as the town began to heal, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of the lives lost. They had stopped the siren, but the cost had been high. Chapter 7. The unraveling months passed, and life in Ashton slowly returned to normal. The suicides stopped, and the town began to forget the horrors of the past year. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The siren's song haunted her dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness they had faced. One night she woke to the sound of music. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The siren's song. She jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and ran to her living room. There, in the darkness, stood the siren. Her eyes were filled with malice, her voice soft and deadly. "You thought you could silence me," she whispered. "My song will never die." Sarah backed away, her mind racing. She had to warn Tom, had to find a way to stop the siren once and for all. But as she turned to run, the siren's song filled her ears, drowning out all thought. She felt herself being drawn towards the window, the urge to jump overwhelming. She fought with all her might, but the pull was too strong. The last thing she saw before she fell was the siren's smile, victorious and cruel. Chapter 8. The Eternal Echo. Tom arrived at Sarah's apartment the next morning, worried when she hadn't answered his calls. He found the window open and Sarah's lifeless body on the pavement below. Grief and anger filled him as he realized the siren's curse had not been broken. Determined to end it once and for all, Tom returned to the cave. The siren was waiting for him, her song filling the air with a haunting beauty. "You can't stop me," she taunted. "I will always find a way." But Tom was prepared. He had brought with him a device that could play the reverse song at a frequency powerful enough to disrupt the siren's voice. He activated it, and the cave was filled with the strange, soothing sound. The siren screamed in rage and pain as her power was drained away. Her form began to waver and she collapsed to the ground, defeated. Tom stood over her, his heart heavy with sorrow and determination. "This ends now," he said, his voice steady. With the last of her strength, the siren looked up at him, her eyes filled with a malevolent fire. "You may have silenced me, but my song will live on. It will echo through the ages, and someday it will find a new voice." As the siren's body disintegrated into dust, Tom knew her words were true. The song's power was ancient and unyielding. But for now, at least, the town of Ashton was safe. He left the cave, the reversed melody still playing, a fragile barrier against the darkness. The legend of the siren would live on, a haunting reminder of the power of her song. And though the town was safe for now, Tom knew that the true battle was far from over. As he walked away, the wind carried a faint, familiar tune. The siren's song, eternal and unbroken, waiting for the day it would rise again.